talk about Someday My Prince Will Come, which is an intricate and fascinating tune, hard to play, lots going on, inspired partly by Huarui. I was going to do it anyway, but I decided to do it as my next video just because he sort of brought it up, and he said that when he was watching my solo version of it from a couple of years ago, he noticed I didn't ever solo on the D7 chord, and he wanted to know what to do about that, so I thought I'd cover that and some other issues in my latest video. So I'd like to dive in straight away with the melody. I'm going to play it for you, just the first half. Okay, so there's quite a lot going in already. Let's hit the first few notes. Okay, what's going on here? Well, there's chromatic movement. Okay, so this note here, F sharp, is where our D7 comes from, right? Okay, so... And the interesting thing about this melody is it dictates the harmony really strongly. Like if you remember, I think, was it Stella, the last one I did? No, it's How Insensitive, actually. But both of those tunes, Stella and How Insensitive, have in common the fact that the melody is, broadly speaking, diatonic with a few chromatic half steps. Like Stella is... I mean, that sort of G flat doesn't really count for anything, it's just a passing tone. But the melody itself is basically very strongly in a B flat major mode. There's no sort of chromatics to suggest that all this rich harmony is going on underneath. That's common in jazz standards, actually. So to have a melody going D7, you know, is very vertical. And the nearest thing to it I can think of, maybe All of Me. This is like that. It's telling you what the chords are. Also, Darn That Dream, which has a similar pattern motif at the beginning to Someday My Prince Will Come, which is that fourth going down a major third, then resolving to the next one. But in that tune, it does it again. So I'll cover that tune at some point. By the way, that's a great one. But this tune has that. Okay, so that really suggests. I mean, there's not too many options to harmonise that. You could use B flat. You could use minor, and actually in the tune it's major, it goes up a half step. Come back to that later. Okay, and then that strongly suggests C minor, sorry. There's kind of a C harmonic minor-y sound to that. Actually, it starts on E. And it goes to G7. G7. So that fits that 2/5 then, C minor, F7 very nicely. Then we get this thing. Yeah. We have this sort of turnaround. So that should be the 11th there. Now, you might have remembered a couple of things about this. This is actually a very, very common type of progression with a very, very common type of melody over it, but it might not be immediately obvious to you unless you've learned quite a few standards. So this could be either B flat major and inversion, whatever, but usually I play this as a D minor 7, and we go down a half step to D flat full diminished, in fact, with an A over the top of it. Now this is an interesting one because the diminished 7th chord here does not actually contain an A, so the A is like a borrowed note from somewhere else. You see this a lot. The melody is actually diatonic here. So you have a few sort of funny notes there. So this, you see this kind of thing, body and soul, few other tunes. So usually when I'm playing this, I just kind of think of like a low voicing for the diminished seventh, and then just put the notes up on top on its own. But in practice, you could just think of that as being an embellishment of D minor coming down a half step in the harmonic minor scale, or the minor sixth diminished scale or something, if you know what that means. It's kind of just a note that's kind of carried over. Yeah, it's hard to say. You could give it a scalic significance, but I think that it's kind of not worth it really. I just want to point out that these things are really common in the repertoire, funny notes over diminished sevenths. And then we get this thing, which is absolutely classic, the minor 11th going to F7. And in this case, we're really thinking the minor seventh just as an extension of the F7 chord, like a suspension almost or something. And then forgive the rubbish guitar playing. So the next step is to look at the second half, and then same, same, and we go. And you have a leap up to an unexpected note. And again, it's very leapy. Like, I subscribe to this idea, I think it's Heinrich Schenker's idea, that you hear melodic connections and steps, scale steps, going up and down, seeing this kind of thing. And you hear leaps as harmony, or leaps like this one. Similar to All of Me, that line, actually. You know, it's very old school. That's one of I think that's a nice chromatic, that sort of bluesy minor third going into the major third of B flat, if you're looking at it from the point of view of B flat major, which I'd encourage you to before thinking about the chords. That's a sustained F, and often in jazz versions you play an F pedal there. So chordally, what's going on here? That's outlining pretty clearly a B flat major chord, although some harmonisations have it as an F minor 7th, in which case it'd be an F minor 13th. And usually it's a move to a move to 4 like this. So often we play that makes a really nice so you got the E diminished there with the note that isn't actually in the chord, so and then resolving to the E diminished. Back to 1, because E diminished seventh normally goes back to 1, and then some kind of weird pedal thing going back. So I'm just going to play all the chords for you now. The last bit there, I'm just doing like a little 1-4-1 movement, but the bass would be, if I just use my game changer pedal, product placement. Oh, it's run away, so I've got my socks on. There we go. Oh no, still run away. A beautiful F. When you're playing this tune, the first chord that sticks out, or at least it sticks out to me, is the D7, and that's literally the second chord of the tune. And the reason why it sticks out is, first of all, it's not diatonic to B flat major, which is the key of the tune. it's also that it resolves in a funny way. So D7 would normally resolve like upper fourth, and it would be to G major or G minor. So G minor is a chord that's in B flat. It's a relative minor chord, absolutely fine, chord 6. But it doesn't. It resolves to another diatonic chord, which is E flat. And that movement, half step upwards, is not obviously a 2-5-1 movement. In practice, actually, it's not that big of a deal for a reason that I'll explain in a second. But one way to understand this progression functionally is that it is a interrupted cadence. So instead of going to the expected chord, it goes to an unexpected chord. It's interrupted, and in this case, that chord is actually chord 6 of G minor. So if you think of that as temporarily that D7 belonging to the key of G minor, in a manner of a secondary dominant, and so it goes to the expected G minor, it goes to the interrupted chord E flat major, then that kind of makes sense because you get the same thing in. Okay, expected to go back to B flat, goes to G minor, right? So that's the other side of the coin. That's the major one, and that's a sound we often hear. In fact, Barry Harris fans will approach, or rather students will approach a 2-5-1 as if it was an interrupted cadence like that. So that's an interesting finding, I think, from that point of view. You know, you don't often hear too many of those, but actually that kind of semitone movement going like that is quite common in early jazz. So you hear it in things like whispering. Kind of very old school progression. So it's a bit less kind of avant-garde than you might think, seeing a D7 and then resolving in that funny way. But I'm going to just sort of point out some options for soloing. So, I mean, you've got to know the basic arpeggios, and I'd suggest starting with the triads, because you can see there's a couple of passing tones in there, but basically everything I was doing was based on the 1, 3 and 5 of each chord. And you can hear how much of the tune is in there. And then you I'm moving up to some diminished there, you can hear. Maybe later on you might want to sort of practice. Like the more extended chords. You know, just to kind of give it a bit more colour, but there's a lot in the basic triads there. It's really amazing. So if I was just to play that on the progression. And so on, right? So that's just using, you know, very simple chord tones, and it sounds really good, I think, because the chords come thick and fast, and it sounds good to outline them. However, at some point you might want to think about scales, and that's fair enough. And I think and substitutions as well, of course, but let's focus on scales first. Now that D7 is not diatonic to the key, but you can see it, as I said, as part of G minor. So in that case, because that's a D7 and G minor, you might want to think about the harmonic minor scale, or think about this as a 2-5-1 going into G minor. And the trick of it is we can actually resolve to G minor because it sounds good over the E flat. I mean, that's what an E flat major 7th chord is. It's a G minor triad stacked on top of an E flat. So that means we can totally use that. Let me just play it through. Sounds great, right? Let me do another example. And the next one goes to, so it's another tonicization, this time G7 going to C minor. Does it twice and becomes 5-1 back to B flat major. So that's a little bit easier to play over. That might be the sort of thing you might come across. So we're just going to move on to this progression now. It's D minor 7, D flat diminished 7th, C minor, S7. Okay, so this is, it happens twice. This is a standard turnaround to get it in the swing era a lot. Loads of tunes have this. It's not that unusual. But again, if you haven't transcribed a lot of old standards, you might not, or learnt them, you might not know that sound, that progression. Okay, so there's a few ways we can deal with this. The first way is actually just to ignore it. So if I just go back to this spot. About 12, I think. Okay, listen to this. Okay. Okay, I'll play through it a little bit more so you can hear that it still works. So this chord progression is just purely linking these two chords together, the 3 minor 7 and the 2 minor 7, the D and the C. It's just purely a bridging chord. It has very little kind of functional influence of its own, but it's a beautiful colour. Barry Harris moans about the fact that nobody uses this anymore. It's a flat 3 diminished. Now we came across it in How Insensitive, but that had a little bit more time to really have a colour, so that's why we can kind of ignore it a little bit. But if you want to dig into it, it's a very interesting thing. So by going from D minor 7, you can essentially see that as being an inversion of you know, the F major, B flat major 9th chord. So it's kind of going between B flat and this chord here, which is kind of the same thing as E flat 6. So if I play like a B flat chord here and an F6 chord there, I do this one, B flat. You can see that those are the two notes that are moving, right? So with that in mind, we can go. You can actually just use it, play bridging phrases ourselves. Rather than thinking of that as a particular sound. I'll show you how that works. Let's go back to where we were. Now you'll notice that I did a couple of things which might not be harmonically correct. One thing I'm doing is just going, yeah. Okay. This is moving down in half steps using a minor 7th. That works absolutely fine, even though it's not the correct chord. If we want to sort of respect the melody a little bit more, we could play a line cliche, something like this. So let's go back to 10. In a way, I don't think that sounds as good. I think, you know, honestly, the best way of dealing with that is not to make a meal out of it. You know, you can obviously reference it, you know, with arpeggio or something even, but even that sounds a bit like too much. So, I'm just fingers getting out of control there. It's just like, sounds like a gypsy jazz thing. The last bit to deal with, which is the turnaround and the vamp at the end. The turnaround is so typical of kind of like early jazz, I guess, you know, and things like blues, rhythm changes, St. Thomas, Doxy, that kind of old school chord stuff. So it's kind of like B flat 7, E flat major, E diminished 7th, or I think they've got a slightly more kind of modernised version of F minor, B flat 7, E flat major 7th, major 6th, whatever, E diminished 7th, and then back to 1, and we get that vamp. That's the top of the tune. So having mastered that little E flat 7 thing, you can then also just use a blues scale. That sounds really good. So you can go and just do that, resolve back to the B flat. Because so many of the notes of the blues scale, like that note, the flat 5, and the flat 3rd, as well as the root of the B flat blues scale, just sounds really good over the diminished. I'll quickly demonstrate what I mean. Okay, so we're going to play B flat 7 in sec. 1, resolve to E flat. And now let's play something diatonic usually over the end. You've got a lot of fun. A lot of fun can be had on that pedal, but it's really not around long enough. I don't think there's not even really a pedal on this particular backing track. It could just be a turnaround like that, 1-6-2-5. It's not really worth getting too fussed about that. Again, like the changes move very quickly when you're playing in triple time. So I'm just going to play for you the cross rhythm that Wynton Kelly uses when he's comping on the Miles Davis version. So that is essentially me going 1 2 1 2 1 2 1 2 1 2 1 2 1 2 1 2 1 2 1 2 1 2 1 2 1 2 and 3 1 2 3 1 2 3 1. So it's just a different way of breaking up that 3/4 into like a long 3, which is one way of doing it. Another way of doing it is going 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2 3 ba ba di ga da go ba 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 da go di da di ba ba di ga do ga ba, like that. It's just two ways of breaking down a bar of 6. 1 2. So if I do that, I can actually phrase in 4 over the top of Someday. 1 2 3 4 1 2 3 4 1 2 3 4 1 2 3 4 1. There's a bit more relaxation. So it gives you a bit of a different place to go if you want to, especially on that slightly faster tempo. Anyway, thanks for watching. I hope it all makes sense, and post any comments below.